record. So we're recording from here on in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce now to you Ruth and Richard. Oh, before I do that, I should just say hi. I'm Lindsay Bridge, for anybody who doesn't know me, and I work for Ruth's team, which is the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence team, and I'm going to be your little host today. I'm going to introduce Richard and Ruth, and I think we're going to start with Richard. So, Richard, if you want to unmute and say hello, tell us a little bit about you, and then some of the themes of the strategy.
Thank you, Lindsay. Thanks for all your organisation. Just to say, it's absolutely fantastic to be part of this amazing event today, and thank you to everybody for joining us. It's a really tremendous turnout, and with more joining us every moment. So I'm Richard Padwell, and I'm the police officer. I'm the superintendent for partnerships in Bradford district. Although I previously worked in Bradford some time ago, I came back at the start of this year, so already a lot of the work had been done in relation to producing this fantastic strategy. So a little later on, I hope to be able to thank those who have really sort of taken part and played a leading role in that. I am just on the coattails of all that fantastic bit of work, but I'm really, really pleased to be linked and associated to with what is, I think, a really fantastic strategy. And it's really about recognising all the amazing work that's been done so far, and then taking things to the next level together in partnership. So I think the first thing to do is to, say, well, what's the title of the strategy? Because I think that does quite clearly help explain what it's all about. And just to remind everyone about the title, it's about taking positive action, changing attitudes, and improving lives. And that's absolutely very clear as to what we're trying to do here collectively. I'd just like to point out a few key parts of the strategy, and then I believe that Lindsay will be asking both Ruth and myself a few questions. We don't expect this to take very long because we'd like to have as much time as possible for any comments or questions. So what are some of the key elements or aspects of this strategy? Well, the first thing is it's quite clearly an all-age strategy, and this absolutely acknowledges the fact that children are quite clearly deemed to be victims in their own right of domestic abuse within the new domestic abuse bill. And I think that's absolutely essential that we recognise and understand the specific impact with everything that we know and are continuing to learn about the potential and actual impact on children through their lives. And it's about really trying to do something about ending that cyclical nature of abuse and problems. So absolutely a key part of it is about early intervention and prevention. There's lots of amazing stuff going on in Bradford, lots of other things being developed, and I think it's absolutely critical that domestic abuse, sexual violence play a key part in the development of all the various early help work that's going on across all the different agencies, partners, and third sector organisations and community organisations. And then, as well as the fact that it's about all the different partners, it's about the people who have the lived experience, of course, the people who have unfortunately had the experience, who have been victims, who know what it is like and have that understanding and that knowledge, and can give us that feedback and help us to shape what we do collectively as a partnership to be as effective as possible. So absolutely, it's all about co-production, and we're very pleased to have on our representative on our board, the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Board, which is the board I chair, at least one representative with lived experience. So it's also really about a recognition that if we address the support and the interventions that are required in relation to perpetrators, then this will reduce the victims, the risks to victims of abuse. Now, this is not about in any way, shape or form being soft on perpetrators. as a police officer, absolutely, I would love nothing more for us to improve and increase our detection rates, our charge rates, our positive outcome rates, reduce the amount of attrition we have in terms of charges leading to convictions, and that will continue to be a key and central emphasis. But we have to understand, do we not, that there is more to be done in terms of preventing harm to victims. So working with perpetrators, not just as perpetrators, but as individuals who have themselves support needs that can be addressed, seeing the whole picture, and again, really quite clearly from the point of view of ultimately reducing harm to victims and families, children, and everybody involved. So finally, I just wanted to say that another key element, another key aspect is around us as a partnership collaborating as effectively as we can together in terms of bringing the maximum amount of funding to meet the gaps in service provision. Now, that will be a continuing and ongoing challenge. Again, at yesterday's board meeting, we had some very interesting and lively discussion on that very subject. Nobody is claiming to be able to wave a magic wand, but we have to do everything we can collectively to get the most funding from the most investment, and to try to ensure that it is used as effectively as possible based on the best evidence, the best research, to ensure that what we are doing collectively is as effective as possible. So again, thank you so much for inviting me and for giving me the honour of chairing such an important, critical board. I think this strategy is amazing. Again, I can have no claim no credit really for the development of it, and I do hope that we'll be able to give the credit to those who have been involved over the next 10 to 15 minutes. Ruth, would you like to introduce yourself and come in and add a few comments on that, please?
Yeah, thank you very much, Richard. I think most of you on this call will probably have come across me at some point. So my name is Ruth Davison and I'm the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Manager based within the local authority. So I have a real privilege in my job. Not only do I have an amazing team that I work with within the council, but I also work with you as the wider partnership in terms of supporting the work of the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence. And I think our role really after today is to move forward together as a group and to think about how we can best deliver this strategy over the next 3 years. I think my boss Ian Day's on this call and he was like, oh, you know, well done on producing the strategy. And my view is the hard work probably starts now. The strategy was, you know, maybe not the easiest thing to pull together because we all maybe have slightly different views on some of the issues and where we want to take the work. But actually the key thing now is that we use this as a working document, and over the course of the next 3 years we deliver on the strategy and we use it as a live document so that we can respond to emerging needs. For those of you that do know me, I really love the innovation that we've tried to bring in the strategy, and I really also love the fact that actually what we've tried to do quite bold on some of the key issues where maybe we've had difference of approaches in the past in the district and sort of tried to set a course of direction that meets a middle ground. So just in case I've not bored any of you previously, I suppose I thought I would just touch on what qualifies me for the role that I have. And so I could say that I'm the world's best chocolate eater because that is probably true. And I also really like playing football and I'm quite a hard tackler in defence. But actually my proper profession historically was as a solicitor in the district in Bradford. So I worked in a firm in Little Germany, and actually I was really inspired by the work of Staying Put. So they used to bring clients to my office who were probably at the worst point in their lives, and what we would do is to work together to secure injunctions through the work I did, and Staying Put provided the more holistic support so that we took people on a journey, and it was really lovely to see. Sometimes a couple of months down the line, sometimes it took a couple of years, but people would go through that journey and end up with better outcomes as a consequence. I was also the chair of a domestic abuse charity in Leeds, in some ways similar to Staying Put, provided outreach to victims and children. And I put in over 10 years in that charity, and I think that really built in me a passion for this subject area. So how did I get from being a solicitor to here today? Well, I decided that my calling really is around social justice and getting equality of outcomes for people, not equality of provision. And so I went to run a homeless charity for 3 years in Bradford, and did quite a bit of strategic work with the council whilst I was running the homeless charity. And one of my colleagues in housing contacted me and sort of said, we have a job going and you're probably the loudest voice in the room, always complaining that we could do things better. So do you want to come and help us? So I moved into the council with that vision of trying to make processes better for people. And my hope is that through this strategy, that's what we can achieve. Now, we do normally call her Lindsay, but today, Lindsay is Michael Parkinson. So we're going to pass back to Lindsay now to start to ask a few questions.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That's very kind of you. I did, when we first started doing these last year, I won't mention anybody's name, but I did say, well, I wanted to be Michael Parkinson. And this person replied with, I think you were a bit more Mrs. Merton. But there we go. What can you say? Really pleased that everybody's here. I'm just going to put a few questions. I mean, what I'm going to say really is 10 years of Safeguarding Week. This is a fabulous way to celebrate it because this is such an ambitious strategy. And it feels like a breath of fresh air to me, who's been around for a long time. It feels really positive. But I'm going to ask if, you know, how was it produced and would you do anything differently next time?
Okay, I think I'm just going to start with the response to this question and then maybe pass to Richard around future plans. So for me, what was key was the participation of the widest range of partners in the district. So we established not only a key steering group, which was multi-agency, so we had some partners from third sector organisations, from the police, from health partners, but we also then pulled in a wider group of around 50 organisations or departments that covered everything from children's services to the DWP. And I saw Anne on this call before. So really trying to pull in partners that maybe historically haven't been linked with domestic abuse as closely as we should have done in the district. And what was really key to us was to do the best we could about bringing those who had suffered abuse and violence in the past into our processes to hear their voice and shape what the strategy did and said. I think for me, when we approached those with lived experience and we brought some of their voice into our process, what we realised was that we really needed that co-production strengthening within the district. So we actually got some learning from our process. I think what was also really unique about the way that we approach this is that we didn't just look at things at a district level. Quite often there's a number of things that we have to do as Bradford to get best results for Bradford, but actually we also sometimes could work regionally to get some really great results and to improve our impact. And so really grateful to the support that we had from the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner in developing our strategy. Obviously now part of the combined authority, but really helped us tease out when it was going to be better to work together. So just in terms of bog standard process, we pulled together our data sets as a partnership and really had a look at what that data was telling us. And we also reflected and we heard a few case studies about why it's important to get this right. And I remember quite keenly Sian from Family Action sharing the voice of a child with us, and that really again hit home to us and probably led to us having an all-age strategy. I think we then used our data sets to pull out the high-level differences that we wanted to make, and you'll see them within our strategy. So we have 4 key main aims. One is around early help or early intervention and prevention. One is around taking the new approach to perpetrators. One of them is around building that co-production approach. And finally, we have how we are going to support and protect victims. So what we did is we went out and we looked at what good would look like, and we reviewed other strategies. And actually we wanted to hit the ground running. So when we had our strategy, whilst we were still consulting on did we have it right, was the language right, were we hitting the right notes, we also action planned for the first year. So actually we're not from today starting to implement this, we've already started to implement it over the past few months. And I think I've touched on this before, but the key for me is that Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Board now have to be held account by this strategy, and they have to use this strategy to make a difference. And I think as a district we have some way around improving our data, being measurable about what we do, and I feel that we tried to incorporate that into this strategy, so it feels like we achieved as a steering group what we set out to do.
Thanks, Ruth. I'll just add a few brief comments. But also, if I'd have known Lindsay was meant to Pakistan, I would have brought my emu with me. But I think it's important to say that the data that is being used across the partnership is improving all the time. So I think that will only get better and allow us to basically ensure that all the interventions we're talking about can be properly evaluated, and we can ensure we can be as effective as possible. I think that there'll be increasing co-production in accordance with the strategic aim going forward. And finally, I think that clearly, and when I came on board, we were well into COVID, and that has caused some issues and challenges, I think, in terms of some of that engagement and consultation. But I think there's been some great work in working around that, which brings me on to some thank yous really, and some appreciation. And I think the first person absolutely to thank and point out the great work that she's done is Ruth herself. And you just have to come along to one of our board meetings and just hear the amount of work that Ruth is directly involved in leading, and it's really staggering, and she's played an absolutely critical role in pulling this together. It was interesting being reminded of Ruth's legal background, and probably around the same time I was well, probably a lot of time before actually, but before joining the police I was working in a law centre in Leeds, and I think it just demonstrates actually that there's lots of different ways in which people can support victims and can help bring perpetrators to justice and effectively improve the way in which we are all dealing with these critically important issues. So Ruth, thank you to you for all your amazing hard work. Secondly, to Mandy Thomas, who was until recently a development officer on Ruth's team, and was really the person I understand who kept things sane. And then also Kate Stewart, one of the council's data analytics team, who supported the early work around identifying the key priorities. There are lots of other people, too many to name, but I think it was a real partnership effort bringing this strategy together. I know there's one or two people sort of coming in potentially, but we will give an opportunity shortly for any comments or questions. So back to yourself, Lindsay.
Thank you, that's really good, Richard, thanks for that. Yeah, interesting actually about Mandy. So Mandy was the person who kept our team sane, so I'm not sure what that says about us now, but hey ho. I'm going to ask the next question, and I think Ruth's going to address it. You might want me to share the screen with us, so let me know when you do. I'm just asking what the key challenges and ambitions the strategy will address. So what's it going to do?
Thank you very much, Richard, for your kind comments, and very strangely, probably to share with 100 people now, but our WhatsApp group for our team is the Crazy Gang. It's titled, so that probably fits in with not having Mandy anymore. So just in terms of the key challenges and ambitions the strategy will address, I think for me some of the key points that Richard made in his opening highlight some of the key challenges that we're going to face, because actually this strategy is going to require a number of approaches to be changed, and it's going to require some questions to be answered, and to some extent it might even require that big thing, some ethos change in how we work. So I think for me, making an all-age strategy really means that we need to look at the Domestic Abuse Act and the fact that children are now victims of domestic abuse in their own right. And that means that we know that we already have a gap in our provision around how we support children. And we're really going to have to do some work over the next year around thinking about, do we repurpose some of our funding? Can we use some of our new funding that we've had allocated, or do we need to make a case for further funding? And they can sometimes be really difficult decisions, especially when there's either limited resource or limited opportunity to bring in extra finance. I think we also have to think about how we approach domestic abuse, because we know that we have the cycle of abusive behaviour, and it's really difficult not to put your money into supporting victims at the point that they're in crisis. So I feel like we have some quite difficult conversations ahead to try and think about how to maybe try and reduce our repeat victimisation by thinking about where we invest our money in slightly different approaches or at different parts of the cycle. I think our repeat rate is high in Bradford, but that is much like across the whole country. So for me, unless we invest in early help or early intervention and build resilience into victims and families, then actually we're going to end up with the same figures year on year. And there is no magic place that we can go and get funding to be able to do it all at one point in time. I think our approach to perpetrators to some extent requires an ethos change. When we know we have limited resource, quite often we feel automatically that actually if we invest that in support for victims and children, that's the right thing morally to do. And we may need to have some thought process around, and when is that a different point to get better outcomes for victims if we invest with some provision for perpetrators. I would, however, and this will hopefully give some hope to some people on this call today, like to mention sexual violence. I think our board is particularly strong in tackling domestic abuse, but for me, the key issue is how over the life of this strategy, we really build our knowledge and response around sexual violence. We have made tiny steps since I've come into post, but now we have this strategy. This is now, I think, something we really want to progress forward at a pace. And so my ask to this partnership is that if you think this is an area where you'd bring some expertise, or if you know somebody that could help support that broadening of our approach, then please contact me, because you know we would be more than willing to have those conversations.
And I'll just literally add a couple of comments to that. Absolutely supporting everything Ruth says, of course, but a strategy is a piece of paper, isn't it? What we don't want is for it just to be on a shelf, just lying there getting dust. It's got to mean something. It's got to bring different behaviours and different interventions, and the development of all that fantastic work which is already out there and taking place. So, how can we really, how can it drive the work of the board, the Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Board, in terms of, I don't want that board to be somewhere where people just sit and don't participate, where people come along and just, hear about things. I want people to come along and go, well, why can't we do things differently? How can we do things differently? Why don't we do things like this? Could we work together in a different way? Absolutely. Yes, yes, yes. From me, as the chair of that board, you won't be getting, oh no, we can't do that. We've never done that. Of course, there are some things which will be challenges, around things like finance. But if we have the collective will to do things better, to build and improve in terms of the service we can give to people who are caught up as victims, if we can help to improve the positive outcomes in terms of detections, in terms of really making sure that we actually reduce the amount of sexual violence and domestic abuse in Bradford, then we will be doing a great thing. And there's all sorts of ways which people can contribute to that. So absolutely. And Ruth and I do not have in any way, shape or form all the answers. And there's some amazing experience out there already that I've seen. And I just think we just need to work together in partnership as effectively as possible. And I think this strategy is a really good starting point for that. Back to you, Lindsay.
That's great. You're making my job really easy, you guys. Thanks for that. Okay, so last question. I think it might be addressed by Richard first. How will the strategy be delivered, and what can the people here today or our partners here do to support it?
Thanks, Lindsay. Well, some of you already know this, but we have 4 subgroups under the board, each with slightly different sort of areas of responsibility, if you like, or emphasis. There are already a number of really, really great people involved in those, getting the boards together, sort of chairing or co-chairing, getting terms of reference all set up, and those were effectively signed off yesterday. So we've now got that baseline, that starting point. So please, if you feel that you're not already involved and you would like to, then contact Ruth and let her know the way in which you feel you can contribute, because we'd like to tie you in with one of or more of those groups or different work streams. It's a question of basically utilising, as I say, the enthusiasm and the experience and the qualities and the knowledge of all of us to try to make a difference. So yeah, and just finally, in terms of where do we want to be in terms of partnership and what does the partnership want to look like? Well, I know that for us, certainly from the police point of view, there's been quite a bit of turnover in my sort of role or rank over the last few years. Well, I believe that I'm here for the next years, and that's really, really good for me. And I think we can get a bit of stability, but not just from the police side, a number of the other partners as well. So I'd like us to be as action focused, to develop that trust, potentially have some leap of faith in the terms of the broader goal, which might mean that we're looking at the broader goal rather than our own individual organisational sort of needs to an extent. I'd like us to all get involved at the earliest possible stage in terms of commissioning and making sure that the services that we are providing are as good and as appropriate as possible. And I think that I'd like us to be sharing information as effectively as possible, evaluating the interventions we make and building on an evidence-based approach. So that would be my summary. Over to you, Ruth.
So I think you've said very much most of what needs to be said to this. I suppose just this is a call out to a bit of advance notice. So one of the things as we continue in our data improvement journey is that we want to widen the data that we use to support our impact. So we are going to be asking partners to work with us to feed into our data collections for different subgroups that will then go up to the board. And the hope is that if you can work with us on that journey and give us some of your data on an anonymised basis, then what we can do is we can ensure that we can get it right, but we can also make sure that we're actually showing that as a partnership we're effective and trying to capture some of the softer outcomes for those people who we support. I think for me, though, the other thing that I wanted to pull out was we do now have the Domestic Abuse Act. So when I said the hard work starts here, we've been planning for this safeguarding week, but we've also been planning quite a big communications approach around the Domestic Abuse Act. So what you will get after this meeting today is you'll get a copy of the domestic abuse strategy, but you'll also get an information sheet for you to share with your workforce around some basics on the Domestic Abuse Act. And I think it's all well and good us telling you, oh, this is what it says in the Act. But as a district, what we now need to do is we now need to start to work through some of and what does that mean in practice? So what we are wanting to do is to host some themed practice forums on some of the changes in the Domestic Abuse Act. And what we'd do is we'd ask either you or some of your staff teams to come and take part in those forums. So the documentation that you get will also set out the practice forums that we're going to run, and we would actively encourage you to support them, because actually the Act itself means nothing unless we work out what difference that makes in Bradford. Lindsay, I think back to you.
Thank you. Thanks very much. That's been lovely, and I'm really excited as well about doing the professional practice forums again. That's something that we're going to revive. So I'm going to open it out for questions or comments from the floor now. If you want to pop something in the chat facility, you can do. Ruth also put her email in there. I think we're going to put the Safer Comms website up as well. Or if you want to just unmute and ask a question, pop your hand up, let me know. Over to you guys. Just madly flicking through.
I take it we've stunned everybody into silence, but please do feel free to, you know, if you think there's anything in terms of how things will work going forward, any advice or suggestions, or anybody who thinks that there's an element that we've not stressed, you know, in the last half an hour that's really important and we need to take account of, be really happy to hear any sort of feedback.
Thanks, Richard. I think sometimes if people are typing, it takes them a few seconds to do that. So I'll give it a few minutes before we see if we see anything in the chat facility.
Please do ask a question, because otherwise I'm going to have to start singing, and you don't want that. That would be cruel and unusual treatment.
I'll tap dance, not like that.
Yeah.
Do you think I could just say something? It's Angela from Women's Centre. I'd sit on boards in other areas in West Yorkshire, and I do think Bradford being very forward thinking, you know, in terms of thinking about the perpetrator element and the need for it to have its own place within the strategy. I think others are thinking in that way, but I think we are ahead of other areas, and have been for some time, in terms of recognising the importance of in order to work with victims you have of domestic abuse, sexual violence, you have got to address the behaviour that's the cause of what's happening to them. So it's a comment really just to say I'm really pleased that it's so much part of the strategy, because there's a lot of work that needs to be done, and I think we've got some really we've already made some big steps in Bradford, but I think we can further advance our work around perpetrators. And I know, you know, I sit on some national meetings around call for action around work with perpetrators. So actually, you know, we can when I sit at those meetings, I can feed in, you know, what we're doing in Bradford, and people are very interested in that forward thinking. So it's just to say I think it's great, really. So thank you.
Thank you. That's really encouraging. And you're absolutely right. I think we do sometimes need to stop and go, we do really well here. And we've got a couple of questions as well in the chat facility about, so the first one, how will you prioritise what you will do next? Ruth's going to open a bar of chocolate. I'm not sure about Richard, but let's see how are you going to prioritise what you're going to do next, folks?
So Lizzie, of the big partnership meetings that we run, the third meeting was around asking partners that question. So we have this strategy, what shall we do first? So what we did is we agreed with partners some key priorities. So each of the subgroups have got about 6 or 7 things that they're going to try and achieve over the next year. And that's in the form of an action plan that went to the board yesterday. And the board signed off on that action plan. So we are now working towards that deliverables for this year.
If I could just sort of come into my own view, and Ruth might have a slightly different one, but to the question that Helen's asked around, you know, 2024, what will success look like in Bradford? Well, some of the key things that I would be looking for, you know, as a sign that the strategy is working would be a reduction in the number of repeat victims, a reduction in the number of repeat suspects, improvement in the rate of attrition at the moment in terms of the number of cases which do not end up going the full way through to court and a successful outcome. It's definitely something around making sure that that lived experience is there, that co-production is just taking place and is becoming everyday activity, that the funding streams are really identified and are being used as effectively as possible, and then the feedback from victims. And again, I use that word advisedly because you know I don't want people to be seen unnecessarily as victims, and people will come up with their own understanding of their own experience. But those with experiences, those with lived experiences, I want them to feel, would like them to feel that there is, you know, the full understanding and support from right across our partnership. We're working in a coherent, effective manner, in a coordinated way to really support those individuals and to take account of their experience and their feedback.
Great stuff. Thanks for that, Richard. Okay, so can you share key headlines on creative, innovative approaches to tackling domestic abuse and sexual violence across the district? That's from Nabil.
Thanks, Nabil. That's now an open-ended question, and I can waffle on for hours about this. So I suppose what we have is a really great MARAC Navigator programme that's working with both the perpetrator programme, the Maze, and the IDVAs within Stay Input. And that's picking up some of our highest repeat cases that are the highest risk, and taking a needs-based approach to the perpetrator and the victim, meeting some of their needs and then trying to pathway them through into mainstream provision. And in terms of that approach, what we're finding is some really great success in reductions of calls to the police and number of repeat returns to MARAC. And I think actually the way we can know that that's innovative is that actually all the other local authorities in West Yorkshire are currently trying to bid into a pot to try and get their own version of MARAC Navigators. I think what we are in the process of doing is creating a localities approach across the district. So we're working in 5 wards with 5 ward officers to try and think about how can we recognise and respond to domestic abuse on a smaller area basis, so that we're actually trying to particularly focus on either new ways of people getting help, so targeting hard to reach groups, or trying to build resilience. So the area where that's progressed the furthest is a pilot that's about to launch in Buttershaw, working with some community organisations up there and our specialist providers, so that we can try and get in early with families and then try and continue the journey with some victims and move to Buttershaw after experiencing domestic abuse. Really grateful for In Communities and the police's support, as well as Stay Inputs and Footprints Family Centre for that. We're working with our health colleagues, and so we do have both specialist provision linked with GP practices and specialist provision based within hospitals, so that again what we can do is respond more immediately. I think in West Yorkshire we developed and really built on the domestic abuse car model, and again partners are there, and we're basically responding to that domestic abuse as quickly as we can in real life time when that car's operational. I think for me, we have Maz on the call, so Operation Encompass, and what we're trying to do is embed a West Yorkshire approach for Operation Encompass, but also to improve the response within the district. Honestly, it's too open-ended to begin, so I'm really sorry if I've not missed or mentioned your project, but We also have an early help project that's working with children's services. And the key for that is trying to get into families where normally they probably wouldn't have any active resolution the first time they experience domestic abuse. And what we want to try and do is to provide some whole family work. Honestly, Lindsay, you best stop me.
I just were making notes as you were speaking, thinking, she's going to mention that, she could mention that. And it's like, yeah, it's fine. You've mentioned the key ones, so that's great. Yeah, I think we're trying our very best to move forward and to do with the best we can. And I can see loads of innovation. And that's from me, who's like an old dinosaur who's been like around forever, who's now feel like I've been revived. So it's great. There's a great one from Manger about, is there a plan for an annual review based on feedback from the board, but also in the light of new legislation, and the Mayor's new crime plan?
I think it's worth saying that that the new Mayor and the new Deputy Mayor for Policing have made absolutely clear that this is a key area for them. We talked about it at the board yesterday. So I can't think that it would be anything other than one of the highest priorities. Will continue to be so, and that's great. And hopefully that might mean other opportunities in terms of funding. So yeah, behind the strategy there is a plan, and each of the 4 areas will be developing their own plans, and those will be subject to review. The board meets quarterly, as do I think all the subgroups, Ruth. So I don't know if there's anything you wanted to add on to that, but clearly, yeah, the point that Ruth made about accountability, it's really important that this isn't just a one-off and there's a document and we just go off in our own ways. And we want to come back regularly and really test ourselves and look at the data and see it. You know, are things happening? Are things changing? Are improvements being made?
I think when you have a strategy, what you do is you use it to make your decisions. So this doesn't mean that this is all we can do in the three years, but it's just about when we make our decisions as a board, we refer back to that strategy so we know what to prioritise. But there's always a reason as a board that we could justify deviating from the strategy, because actually it's pointless following through on an action if it's no longer going to be effective or relevant. So hopefully that answers the question in terms of a procedural perspective.
Fabulous, thank you. Yes, Sasha, I've shared the link, saferbradford.co.uk.
Lindsay, can I just come in on the point about the backlog in the magistrates and Crown Courts? I mean, absolutely, again, it was brought up and it was discussed, and we've talked about it in terms of the risk register for the DA&SV board. Beyond that, what we can't promise is we're going to, be able to solve it's a national problem around the backlog in terms of courts, as we know, pretty much as a result of, well, it was already taking part, but significantly exacerbated by the impact of COVID. What I can do is say that, it's been identified as a key risk. We are feeding back and making sure that we use any sort of influence we have, and I would encourage everyone to do the same in terms of demonstrating the impact. And we heard firsthand about the impact from one of our board members yesterday. So I think he was on the call as well, actually. If feel free to come in to talk about that. We have to look at seeing what we can do locally to manage that. Whether we can actually do anything to actually reduce the timescales, or just make sure that we are offering the best possible support and contact with individuals, because we do know that that has a significant impact on the attrition rate. It's identified as an issue, and if you have anything you want to suggest that we could do locally as a partnership, then get involved, join one of the subgroups, and lead us in that direction, because we'll be supportive of you.
Thanks, Richard, that's great. Also one from Helen, which is really, hi Helen, I don't see you for ages. You look about 21, darling. So this is lovely, actually. Appreciate the inclusion of perpetrator work, and however, it is specialist work, and I wonder how this will develop and what the vision is across the partnership. How was it planned? Ruth, do you want to come in on that?
Okay, so yeah, Helen, I really like your tricky question as well as your glamorous look. So, the issue for me is that we know that this is perhaps one of the areas where there is a bit of division in approach and a bit of thought that's needed. So, I've actually put in a bid. It won't surprise anybody on this call to know, to the VRU to try and have a bit of a thought process around the perpetrator work, because there has to be a really key focus on behaviour change, and a behaviour change model is obviously one that we get both through the work that's done by Angela's team and the Maze, and also through probation and some of the work they do. But we also know that there's some really good work that's going on in the district around taking a needs-based approach. So that's definitely liaison and diversion that's looking at that, the Marac Navigator programme, along with probably countless housing providers that are meeting the needs of multiple disadvantage. So for me, what we really struggle with is making sure that the work that we do is accredited or is working towards being evaluated if we're trying new approaches, not trying to undermine what's already evaluated and already respected on a national basis, but actually thinking that we need to be able to have an offer that meets perpetrators at all sorts of different points of their journey, and that actually if we take the best of different approaches and put them in the right part of the perpetrator journey, that's how we're going to get the best designed approach in Bradford. And one big piece of work that we want to unpick is relationships where there are, and I'm going to say it this way, allegations of abuse that flow both ways. And one of the things the VRU funding would allow us to do is to sort of have some facilitated discussion to try and agree a district protocol on that.
Brilliant, thanks Ruth. I know that I'm just going to say this right now, because Ruth is my manager and she's a brilliant manager. She talks about these funding bids as if, you know, it's easy, piece of cake. But I'm convinced that she lives at the end of a rainbow because she keeps finding these pots of gold for everyone. So I just want to say thanks for that, Ruth. I think it's amazing work that you're doing. Any other thoughts, comments, questions from anyone? We're getting a few thumbs up there, Ruth, and claps and things.
Lindsay, if there aren't anything else, can I just thank you for hosting today? You've done it incredibly well, very professionally, and you've involved everybody, and for your work in helping to organise the event as well, as everybody already previously mentioned. And thank you for everybody for coming along and taking part. We really hope that this will be the start of even bigger and better things of working together to to deliver the strategy over the coming months and years.
Thank you very much. I think we've got a video that just lasts a couple of minutes that we'd like to share with you to end this on. If that's okay, I'm going to attempt to just share my screen. This is a video of a young girl. It's played by an actor, but it's a real experience. So I say I'm going to attempt to share screen. Let's just see. Okay. So hopefully you've got that there. I don't know whether you'll be able to hear it. That's my only trouble. I'm just going to see if you can hear. Oh. Okay, guys, just hang on. I'm hearing that there's no sound there. Brilliant. Okay, let me just. Yeah, I think they've mucked about with my audio and video. We did get it working yesterday, Ruth, but I'm feeling it's not working today.
Lindsay, we could just share it with the documents that we're going to review, and we can encourage everybody to maybe have a look at it. And we're giving back everybody 5 minutes of their time. So much like Richard, really appreciate you attending today. Look forward to seeing you all again soon. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.